everyone, to a new production of TV2, Getting to Know Your Neighbor, Front Porch Visit. Here at Advent Christian Village, we have many members, and they live all over campus and some off campus. And we thought this would be a good way for you to get to know who your neighbors are. During the course of our interview, you may find that you have something in common with that person, or, gee, I didn't know that about them, even though they've been my neighbor for 20 years. So we hope you'll enjoy this time with us, and I'd like to introduce our first guest today, John, Owen, and Marnie Owen. And they are truly my neighbors. We live right across the street from each other. So this will be kind of like a patio visit or just chatting with each other. And I'm Ann Thompson. Good morning.
Good
Well, good
morning.
morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here and talking with us.
Well, thank you for having us. We're used to waving to each other across the street. Now,
Right.
now we're talking.
Yes, that's right.
That's right.
Well, let's start by telling us, our audience, a little bit about yourselves. Where were you born? Something about your growing up years, special memories.
Okay, you want to start or do you want me to start?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm a Yankee. I was born and raised in Superior, Wisconsin, and my family was long-time residents up there, and when I graduated from high school, they moved to the Orlando area before Disney World. I entered the University of Florida instead of the University of Wisconsin, and I met John in a music class at the University of Florida, and we continued. We're both in the symphony, the University Symphony, and all of the music events, in sorority and fraternity, and then, well, we ended up marrying 2 years later, 1959. Got our 60th coming up. And since then, we've lived in several places. He spent time in the Army, and we've just had a wonderful life. We have 4 adult sons. We have 4 grandchildren, 3 16-year-olds, and a to-be 14-year-old. And we've had a wonderful background in music, both of us professional symphony musicians, retired. Boat business, sailboat business. We've just had a wonderful married life and a wonderful career. And we're happy to be here. Love it. Just love it.
Well, I'm a Florida cracker. I grew up over in Palatka on the St. Johns River. And my dad was career Navy, World War II, submarines in the South Pacific. He was at Cavite Navy Yard when the Japanese bombed there the same day as Pearl Harbor. So I grew up with the Navy in mind. I was going to Annapolis. There's no question about that. So all through school I did science and math and all of that to prepare to go to Annapolis. And but also found out that I love music, and I played in the high school band in Palatka. And after a 2-year military prep school in Alabama, got my appointment, took my physical, and found out I was colorblind. I didn't realize I was red-green colorblind until I was 20 years old. And it's amazing I got through that, but I can still function, although I still ask Marnie many times, what color is that?
It's the
But
shade.
ended up at the University of Florida, and was going to be a chemical engineer. All my background had been in chemistry and math and science and one thing and another. But I found I was spending far more time in the music building than I was in the chemistry labs. So I changed majors and ended up with a music major. And then, as Marn said, we went in the Army band, and then I was studying with a teacher over in Birmingham, and he called one day and said, the principal trumpet job of the Birmingham Symphony is going to be open. Come over and take your audition, and the job will be yours. So we did, and we moved to Birmingham, and were there for 16 years, played in the orchestra. I was teaching high school music, high school band director, and everything from kindergarten through postgraduate music I taught. After 4 years of high school band directing and music, I was invited to teach at the University of Montevallo, which is a small liberal arts school just south of Birmingham. Very fine music department, and I was able to continue playing and teach. And that's hard to put those two together, both full-time. And so we did that for a total of 16 years in Alabama. And then the gypsy gene that my family calls, we're vagabonds and wanderers. And starting in 1640, when the first John Owen came to to Connecticut, it's been in the family ever since. So suddenly and the Navy stories. My dad came back from the South Pacific saying, "My goal in life is to sail off into the sunset in a yawl." He had no idea what a yawl was, but that was what you were supposed to say. So
Oh, good, because I
he
didn't know what a
did.
yawl was.
Yeah, well, it's a rig on a boat, a style of sailboat. But so I had heard that all my life, and the adventure to take the family, and I took a leave of absence from the university. We sold our home. We bought a big sailboat, and our 4 sons, who were all in school, we took off to the Caribbean and sailed for well over a year, and then we lived aboard the boat for another few years. The hard decision was not to leave and go cruising, but it was to call my dearest best friend at the university and say, "I'm not coming back," because I had a leave of absence.
And a 2-year leave of absence.
A 2-year leave of absence.
Not
And
a sabbatical, but.
was planning, fully intended to go back and continue my career in teaching and so on, and retirement, all of those good things. But we gave all of that up. We ended up in St. Augustine, which was the closest port to Palatka, where my parents and family still lived.
And my mother was in Orlando.
And Marty's mother was still in Orlando, which was
My dad
fairly
had
close.
passed
So we
away.
settled in St. Augustine and ended up, after knocking around a little bit, and Marny said, you've got to go get a job. You can't just be a boat bum. So we ended up buying Ortega Yacht Sales in Jacksonville and went in the boat business. We did that for 16 years, selling a brokerage and new boats. And finally we sold that business and then so-called retired, took our boat back to the Bahamas and spent the winters for every 6 months for several years, and then came back and decided it was time to give up the high seas. And we were, the next thing we knew, we were over here at Advent Christian Village. And so here we are, and having a great time.
But then when we came back to the St. Augustine area, I auditioned for and got in the Jacksonville Symphony. So I had
Marty played the whole
I had
time.
a career of 23 years with the Jacksonville Symphony.
Yeah, she
And that
She
was,
played 50 years professionally and finally said that's enough and retired.
well, I could still play. I didn't want to be told I had to retire. That
Never
was,
been fired, but time to quit.
yeah.
But she's played here at church.
But I'm not
a
doing
few
that
times.
anymore. I have retired. I want to, yeah.
And
I
your
have retired.
instrument of,
Violin. Mine's violin.
well, I think I noticed a couple things in common with us. John, you grew up 30 miles down the river from me.
Yes.
From
That's
Green
right.
Coast Springs.
That is right.
And that was a great childhood for me growing up in a small town,
Yes.
Green Coast Springs.
Yes.
And probably for you also in Palatka.
And my town in Wisconsin, Superior, Wisconsin, was at that time 39,000. So it was a small. Twin ports to Duluth, Minnesota, which was much larger because the two are located right on the tip of Lake Superior. They are the twin ports, as Minneapolis, St. Paul are the twin cities. Superior, Wisconsin, and Duluth, Minnesota are the twin ports.
And did you grow up boating as well?
No, well, on an inland lake, we had a summer cabin. Always had little runabouts, but not the big boats. No, I think I aged my parents probably 25 years when we told them we were going to go sailing.
Announced we're going to sea.
But I love the water, but not the big boats.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, we never had boating on Lake Superior. recreational boating. I mean, this has all changed. It's a big deal up there now.
Well, and I've heard you played in the Jacksonville Symphony
Yes,
in
I
years
did.
past.
Yeah, most recently. So I retired from that. That was and then freelancing in the Jacksonville area. Did a lot of freelancing with trio, quartet, duets, weddings, and that sort of a thing. And that's fun.
Well, you tell me each a story about your childhood, a special memory of your childhood.
My childhood was that of just
Snowball fights.
being outside all the time. Yes, snowball fights, building igloos, ice skating. Never were we inside. Always ice skating. We had neighborhood ice skating rinks. We had an indoor ice skating rink, curling rink. Now, I was not involved in the curling sport, but the now prominent curler, even for the Olympics and national competition, is from Duluth. And he trained in the Superior rink. So I haven't, and don't ask me his name, I would know it, and I'll know it as soon as we leave here. But just always had wonderful outside sports. The weather didn't, we had 3 snowsuits. I would get one entirely encrusted with snow where I could hardly move and take it in, and Mother would shake it, and then she'd put it in the dryer when the dryers came about. I immediately got into the second one, and I was just outside. That's the fun childhood I had.
Yeah.
And had great musical training and participated in a lot of musical venues around town, geared for elementary, junior high, and high school kids. So it was a great upbringing. Had wonderful parents. My dad was a prominent businessman in Superior. My mother was a retired school teacher. I had an older brother who has since passed away, but he was an Annapolis graduate and had a career in the Air Force. And I was very close to him. There was 7 years difference, but he and I got along beautifully. He was always out for my best interest. I was out trying to harass him. And we just had a good time. It was a wonderful childhood.
John, what about you?
Well, my childhood growing up was very different during the war years. A couple of times as both an infant and as a young 3 or 4-year-old in Hawaii, because that's where the subs were.
Right.
And then in 1940, suddenly they got orders to the entire subfleet to go to the South Pacific and headquarter in the Philippines. Long before anybody thought that there was an issue with Japan or what might come. So there were no submarines in Pearl Harbor. In any case, Dad was there. The Navy was the only life there was. In 1944, I guess, taking a routine physical for promotion to go to another submarine, war still raging, and the doctor said, well, you've got a little smudge on your lung there. We think it may be TB. And they put him in the hospital, and it turned out not to be TB or even close to it, but they said, and submarines are very small, and there's particularly the World War II subs. Yeah. But they put him out on a full medical discharge, and it just about killed him. He could not stand the idea of being put out of the Navy, because that's the only life there was. And so in 1945, we moved back from California, where he was in the hospital, back to Florida. And literally he tried to hide. So they bought this 40-acre piece of flat pine woods on Highway 100, halfway between San Mateo and Bunnell. Mm-hmm. You know that old highway going to Flagler Beach. And I grew up in the woods. We had no electricity, had an old generator that ran some of the times. We did have a flowing well, so we had plumbing inside, but no pumps. Propane absorption refrigerator, things like that. So it was really being a pioneer. Mm-hmm. And he tried to be a farmer. Well, he was a terrible farmer. My mother was from Moultrie, Georgia, and grew up on a real farm, and so she always said he can't grow anything. But so he did that for 5 years. So I grew up living in the woods and the creek
And your sisters,
Lake
don't forget,
Crescent.
you had 2 sisters.
I have 2 sisters. And then finally, when one of my sisters got to school age, we moved into the little village of San Mateo, which is 5 miles from where we lived. And we sold the farm and moved into town. And at that point, it became fairly normal. You know, school, junior high, and high school. And by that time, I had joined the band. I'd taken up trumpet and said, hey, this is fun. And so the rest of the time was fairly normal. High school years in Palatka area. And that was nothing really unusual there. Our band director was a violinist of all things, from Stetson University.
That
And
made him a pretty normal
he would go over to drive to Gainesville, which was a 45-minute drive back then, to play in the university orchestra once or twice a week. And he would take me with him. So that was my first introduction to symphonic playing. And I was bitten by that bug, so that was where it happened. And then went into school and Army and all of that. And, but that first 5 years down on the farm, I was Tarzan. I mean, you know, it was a pair of shorts and no t-shirt, nothing, just running loose, had a horse, rode the woods. So it was a wonderful background. And I pity the children today who, when you say, what does a horse smell like? What does a pig look like? Have you ever touched this animal or that animal or gone in the woods? And I used to catch little green grass snakes and put them in my pocket and walk around with them for days. So I had all of those kinds of that experience. My 2 sisters, one, they're 7 years younger. One is 7 years, the other 8.5, I guess, anyway. The youngest has passed away. But my other sister, Nona, married a physician and lives in Alexandria, Louisiana. They're still there. And we visit quite a bit. And so that was life in Palatka until we moved away. And when I moved away to school and work, we never moved back. So I don't have a lot of school friends. I remember some names. I think I've been to 1 or 2 reunions over the last 60, 70 years. But I just don't know anyone there. My family's friends, my parents' friends I knew as adults, but I really lost touch with all of my schoolmates because I left town and never went back to keep those relationships alive. And so we ended up here.
Well, can we go back a minute and talk about the life on the sailboat?
Sure.
I think our audience might enjoy that.
Let me just make this point. And I have nothing but the greatest admiration for Marny, because that was not, she would never in her life choose that. She did it because, well, that's your dream, I'll help support it and go with you. We were in the boat business for 16 years, sailboats and powerboats. The powerboat is like an automobile. You have a destination, and you want to get there as quickly as you can. Going from A to B is not terribly important. That's kind of boring. The sailor, it's the passage that's important. The destination, we don't care where we end up. You just follow the wind. So I'm a sailor. She's a powerboat. The destination was important. Let's go.
And that attitude is good for one person.
So in any case, that...
And my agreement, and I had a wonderful time, and I would never have remained, I would never have not gone. But my vote was worth 5 votes.
There were 5 males, our 4 sons and myself, and so she had 6 votes, which means that if we needed to veto a decision,
Well, the
Her one
captain
boat
would
would do
have,
it.
the captain would have done that. But
Well,
it was an experience.
Yeah, we spent, we left in June of '80 and did all the Western Caribbean, Bahamas, out to the
Well,
Turks and Caicos, Haiti, Jamaica, Cayman Islands, down to Honduras, Belize, Mexico, all the Western Caribbean.
But let's back up with the age of our children. Our eldest son had graduated in 1980 from high school. He put off college a year to go on this. And this was the only year we could have done it that way for the entire family to have made a massive trip. Number 2 son was then a senior, was to be a senior the year we went. Number 3 son was to have been a junior. And number 4 son was a fourth grade.
Fourth grade.
Fourth grade. These are years that they missed in school, but we did on the boat. And so we had quite a wide variety, but lots of physical help, which was wonderful. Because I was chief galley and galley mate, and you know, but they loved the aspect of sailing, the sail handling, the excitement of it, and so on and so forth. So I was able to turn that over to them entirely. I did stand my watches, but the mechanics of sailing was the least of the adventure for me. I like the destination. Therein lies a conflict with
Well,
which one.
The admiral just gave the orders and the crew took the
Right,
orders. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But it was very compatible and
Yeah, we had a great
fun
time.
to watch the different emotions of our children. One would get quite moody, and everybody had to have a space on the boat to go work out their moods and Tom would go up forward on the bow and he'd just sit. And I know he was resenting missing his senior year in high school. But then something would come about, there'd be a pot of whales, or a pot of porpoise or whatever come up. Oh my gosh, in an instant that mood would leave without us having any part of it. And then the rest of the day was wonderful. So we learned a lot.
I'm sure y'all learned a lot about each other.
We did, and learned a lot about how to be orderly and everything have its place. You know, it has to be. You have limits, what you can take for 6 people, and so that was mine. And my cooking was a challenge, but we've mastered it.
Yeah, fed us well.
3-burner
You know,
alcohol stove.
A sailboat 40 feet long, 10 feet wide, if it were a square rectangle, 400 square feet. The smallest apartment you can imagine is not that small, generally. I mean, you're gonna have 500-600 feet in a small efficiency. And then you take off the fact that it's pointed, so it's not a square, so you lose some square footage there. And another 25% of it is taken up by mechanical spaces. You got an engine, you've got all the systems that you have in a home. You have a water system and a heating system and a propulsion system and storage and all of that. That takes up a great deal of the 400 square feet. So, and people have asked, didn't you get claustrophobic? No, you just stand up and look and you've got
You have to
an
hold it,
unlimited horizon, so you really never have the sense. Bad weather, stormy, you're down below, you're hunkered down, and
challenging.
everything's closed up, and yeah, it's pretty tight. But beyond that, there was never a sense of,
When we took out
I mean, too
the
small.
flooring carpet of one of the boats, now we put a carpet, just cut it to fit the shape of the floor in the boat, which was beautiful teak and holly, but we wanted it for our everyday use to have it carpeted. When we took that out to clean it and to vacuum it, and put it on the floor to vacuum it, and then you look at that in the reality of the room that you were in, and we 6 lived in that small space. But it
but it
worked.
was good.
It worked.
Well, now that you're at Advent Christian Village, how did you find Advent Christian Village and what went into your decision making?
Well, we lived in a lovely area in Jacksonville, and we had a lovely log home on a street of 6 residences, and had a creek going through it, and we had a wonderful time of beautifying the property, and
We were totally retired. by
Totally
this time.
retired
Sold
at
all
this
the boats
point.
and we were just living
and
there.
after a period of time realized that all of our neighbors, friends, which we were still working, and we didn't really have a social life other than symphony friends and boating customers. But when you retire, you kind of get away from the active association with those friends. We were just visiting with a neighbor one day, and they were talking about this neighbor's mother who required being in a assisted living or a retirement home, and they just didn't know where to have her. And they said, but we know where we're going to go when we retire. And these folks still are within about a year of retiring, and I think they'll come over here. They told us about this area.
They said, we're going to Abbott Christian Village.
So one day, just
What's
with nothing else to do that day, we decided to drive over and take a look at it. So we put the dog in the car and came on over here and drove around and just got out and walked a little bit. And of course, when you have a dog, a friendly dog on a leash, everybody wants to come up and give her treats. And we had a good visit with residents. And went back home and thought about it and came back another time and spent the night in the lodge, and were invited by one of the active residents and employees here at the village to join them for coffee and cookies in the evening. And so we did. We went over there and met a neighbor of theirs who happens to be, and we didn't know it until the conversation, the parent of a boating customer. The son bought 2 boats from us, and the son is a musician and realized that the son and I had jobbed together. And here that was a neighbor, and they lived here.
Small world story.
Very small world, very, very small, and it was wonderful. And that kind of just started the ball rolling. And then the third time we came over, we had an appointment with Ann Thompson, and from that point on, then we had made the decision to come over. We found the house that we wanted, liked it, and committed to it. Went home and put our log house on the market, and within 4 days it was spoken for. So it was the work of God working with us, telling us what to do. The time was right, and we agreed. So we've been very happy here.
And you've also beautified your yard where you live now,
Thank
too.
you. Thank
The
you.
neighbors thank you.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Well, it's an ongoing.
You know,
And John is the one that takes the
gardening,
credit for. He loves
planting,
that.
Making things go. Yeah.
I appreciate the color and the work involved, and that's his cup of
But
tea.
I guess it goes back to those early days of living in the woods. I like everything as natural as possible.
Yeah.
And so while I have a couple of defined beds, for the most part, it's put something here and put something there and let it grow kind of thing.
But we do have a wonderful time here.
Well, like you and your butterfly garden in the back,
That's
you're
right.
attracting all those flutterbys.
Yes, they are beginning to find their way.
That's
Good.
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 That's beautiful.
And I began to find I had new muscles from being out in Newton, so.
Don't you though? Oh, goodness, yes. That'll do it.
Well, thank you so much for coming and sitting on our make-believe front porch and having our front porch visit. Thanks so
It's been
much.
fun.
Well,
And special thanks to Tom Peak, who has been doing our filming and will be editing and getting this on TV
Yeah.
too.
That's right. Well,
Thank you, Tom.
thank you for having us. And,
Absolutely.
enjoyed it.